Our first session this afternoon, Making Waves, features popular writers discussing how to create an impact as an author. Our panelists are Ashwin Sanghi. He's the author of historical thrillers The Rosa Ball Line, The Krishna Key, and Chanakya's Chant, for which he won the Crossword Popular Choice Award and for which UTV Disney bought the movie rights. Recently, he signed on to co-author an India-based thriller with James Patterson, which will be out later this year. Next, we have Ravi Subramanian. He's the author of 5 best-selling books, including the latest, Bankrupt. An alumnus of IIM Bangalore, he has spent 2 decades in the banking sector. It is but natural that his stories are set against the backdrop of financial services industry. In 2008, his debut novel, If God Was a Banker, won the Golden Quill Reader's Choice Award. The Incredible Banker won him the Economist Crossword Book Award in 2012. Anita Nair. She's a novelist whose works include The Better Man and Lessons in Forgetting. The movie adaptation of Lessons was a part of the Indian panorama at the IFFI 2012 and won the National Award last year. She has a collection of poems, Malabar Mind, and essays, Good Night and God Bless, to her credit. She has won awards like the JFW Award for Literary Excellence in 2010, the Kerala Sahitya Academy in 2012, and the Central Sahitya Academy Award for her contribution to children's literature. Then we have Naresh Fernandes, who lives in Bombay and works with Scroll.in, a digital publisher. City Adrift is his second book. He writes about urban policy, music, migration, and anything else that catches his fancy. Over to you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, good afternoon and welcome to this session, which, as you know, is called Making Waves, How to Create an Impact as an Author. And the authors have already been introduced, but I'm going to tell you something that I found out about them on the internet. When you turn on Anita Nair's website, you hear the sound of a train rattling, which I was very charmed by because, as you know, she wrote a book called Lady Scoope. Ashwin Sanghi is a man of so many parts. He even has a pseudonym, Sean Higgins, and he'll tell you something about that as we go through this session. And Ravi Subramanian has 2,563 friends on Facebook. And we have 53 mutual friends, but we've never met before, so I'm glad to finally share a stage with you. Anita Nair is the odd one out on this panel. She actually studied English literature and did not get an MBA, as seems to be the norm for all aspiring writers these days. Strange. But that's what, as you know, Ashwin and Ravi did. And so they're perfect for this panel. I'm going to start by asking them how their experiences in the business world have helped with their literary careers. And Ashwin, to begin with, at the very beginning of the process, do your instincts as an entrepreneur actually shape the way you approach the very painful process of writing?
I think to a certain extent that it's very difficult to actually construct a Chinese wall between your 2 lives, or avatars as they were. So to that extent, I would find myself regularly using some of my business tools, even in the process of writing. For example, the time and energy that you would devote to a business plan, that's the sort of time and energy that I will devote to a plot. Typically the sort of research that you would do when launching a new product or a new scheme or a service, that's the sort of research that I would do in terms of writing a book. And I think it also then spills over into the post-writing phase, where I think you now have a significant breed of authors who are not really ashamed about marketing.
And I think we'll get to that later in the discussion.
So I think that is the second part of it.
So tell us how your engagement with your readership feeds into that act of sitting in front of that blank screen and filling it up with words.
Well, I think we are living in an age where we are vastly more connected. So I think that the time when as an author, you could pretty much sit on a pedestal and not worry about what people were saying, that time is dead and gone. And if people don't like a product, then they're very quick and very vocal about expressing what they don't like. And I think that is to be seen as an advantage because it sort of adds to your, for example, on an average day, I would be receiving something in the order of maybe around 30 or 40 emails, maybe around 20 or 25 tweets, maybe another 20, 25 Facebook comments. So all in all, maybe about 100 odd pieces of disjointed feedback. But a lot of that actually consists of also material which could actually result in a wonderful piece of work. So a lot of ideation happens from that sort of interaction where people come back and say, hey, listen, you wrote that book, but have you considered that story? So I think there is a lot of value in that interaction which you can now have with your readers, and partly social media and technology is responsible for that.
And we'll discuss that at greater length. Ravi, I know that you actually have sent manuscripts to random readers who've contacted you, almost in the way that sort of somebody at an industrial company would test out a prototype. How do readers' preferences and readers' suggestions affect what you do?
Okay, see, in India at this point in time, when you write a book, there are enough people to read. Okay. The challenge is how do you reach out to the right people and touch the right chord. And I think that's what I do when I send out my manuscripts to about 10 or 12 people whom I have connected on Facebook with or on any other social media with, and whom I trust. You know, you can't just at random send your manuscript to somebody, because then if the manuscript makes its way onto the internet, then you're doomed, then you're gone. Even before the book is out, your manuscript is out. So I send it to them primarily for two reasons. One, the subject that I write is a slightly involved subject. I write a lot about banking and banking thrillers. And banking is a feared subject. Okay? It's not a complex subject, it's a feared subject. So a lot of people don't pick up the book because they think it's got to be involved in complex banking. So I send books to people who are not involved in banking in any way, who don't have any family member in banking, and who just understand banking as a normal guy who goes to a bank and puts money in. The reason is, if they read the book and come back and tell me that, okay, we couldn't understand these segments, it helps you rephrase those segments. And two, it also helps you just take a second check on the story that you've written. Are there any loopholes? Are there any logical disconnects, illogical disconnects? And then, if you are convinced about the feedback, then you can actually make changes in the draft in the way you want to. But the key word there is, if you are convinced about the feedback that you get. It's not that everybody sends in 20 pieces of feedback and you just kind of incorporate all of them in it. So you have to be yourself convinced about it.
I believe you've bounced various possible ending scenarios.
Oh yes. In fact, my latest book, Bankrupt, had a very, very negative ending, and it was a thriller with a very negative ending, and the bankers were shown in extremely poor light in that book. Well, actually, they are shown in extremely poor light in most of my books, but in this particular book, it was particularly bad. And a lot of people came back and said, look, it doesn't make sense. A banker is committing a fraud, is actually getting caught, but is going away scot-free. Okay. And that's when I thought about it, and I did change the ending, and people have now come back and told me that they like the ending a lot better. As in, they like the ending, which means that probably the previous ending would not have worked. I am all for actually involving readers in writing a book, in making sure that because end of the day, the readers pay money to buy a book, right? $300-350 is not a small sum of money. And when they pay, they need to get the money's worth. And this is one way of actually making sure they get the money's worth.
Anita, you write more literary novels. Do you keep the reader and by extension the market quite so centrally in your head when you're writing?
I don't think I actually do that because, see, I just have this basic rule that I follow, which is that I write books, the kind of books that I like to read. Now, the books that I like to read have managed to endure without major marketing effort, without having to have any reader engagement. And I think there is something that is also, to me, probably very divine about the work that I create. That is not to take away anything from what Ravi or Ashwin do, but what I'm saying is the way I approach writing is from a very different angle. So for me, writing becomes a very, very intense and very personal exercise. And to bring in a reader before the book is done would be something that I can't even think of. In fact, very seldom do anybody read my book, as a manuscript, except probably for a couple of friends who I've trusted for years together, and probably my editor. So to that extent, I don't see the reader in my mind, but that doesn't mean that I think the reader is this moronic mass. This is somebody that I think is someone who's going to read my work carefully. To that extent, I'm very careful about treating the reader with respect. This is an unknown reader, a faceless reader. But I believe that the reader is someone who's going to be quick about finding things that don't work in my writing. So to that extent, I do think about the reader. But otherwise, and primarily, it is a very, very personal exercise for me.
Ravi, you've said that you are the CEO of your book. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, I strongly believe that every author is the CEO of his or her own book. Now, before I get into that, I just have a small point to make on...
Oh, good, they're going to fight.
On what Anita said. Okay. Well, Anita is a fairly successful author, so she needs no introduction. And her books sell not only in India, but in many countries across the world. But the difference, Anita, between the time that you came on board, you wrote your first book, and now, is that the market conditions have changed. When did you write your first book?
The first novel was in 2000.
In 2000. 2000, there were hardly any Indian authors. The book scenario was not as cluttered as it is today. Today, every bookstore has 5 new releases a day. Okay. If you add up the new releases from publishers, it actually adds up to about close to 160, 170 books a month from the top publishers. How do you stand out? You were lucky enough that you came in 2000, where there were few people, you were able to make a mark. So people today recognize Anita Nair. Okay, if Anita Nair were to come in today and start afresh, with no background, if you wipe your slate clean and start off today, your writing style may not change, but the success that you have achieved with the same style that you have had from 2000 to 2010, I'm not too sure if the same thing can be replicated with the same style. Today you need to go out, you need to make sure that if you're not a brand, okay, today you are a brand, okay, and that's the difference. For a new person, and I'm sure there are a lot of literary authors sitting in the audience, today if they go out and sell exactly the same way as you do, they will not be able to succeed. Because nobody will even see them, stores will not pick them up, stores will not stock them, media will not cover them, the readers will not be able to know that so-and-so has brought out a book, and the book will bomb. Maybe, it'll take some time to pick up, but the point is today is a day when people want to see thousands of copies of theirs sold. And that will not be possible if you don't go out to the market, don't reach out to the customer, don't sell a book. And that's what I mean when I say that, the author needs to be the CEO of his book. An author needs to stand up, take charge of every single aspect of his book, right from the manuscript, editing, promotions, even to a certain extent the production quality of the book. Because if your book does not look good, if the book quality is bad, the reader is going to say Ravi's book is bad. He's not going to say a Rupa's book is bad or a Penguin book is bad. He's going to say Ravi Subramanian's book was bad. Even if if the feel while reading the book is not good. I think that's where you need, for example, when I wrote Bankrupt, Flipkart promised signed copies of my book to everybody who pre-ordered. It didn't happen. Now, 5 people tweeted to me on the night they got the book saying your books are not signed. And many of them even went on Facebook and started writing comments saying, we were promised but sad we didn't get it. Now, they will never go back and say, Flipkart, why didn't you deliver a signed copy? They will never go back and ask Penguin. They'll only ask Ravi Subramanian or the author. I think that's where you need to take charge because it's your book. You are responsible for it. For the publisher, it's one among hundreds of other books. For you, it's 1 year of effort, or maybe in your case, a couple of years of effort. But for you, it's that only thing which is a matter of life and death. And that's the reason why you need to take charge. And I think that's the reason why I keep saying that an author is the CEO of his or her own book.
Anita Nair, what are you if you're not the CEO of your book?
Well, no. See, what I would want to tell Ravi is that, Ravi, I did publish my first book in 2000. And those books still continue to sell. I mean, my backlist is still a very, very thriving backlist. And I don't believe that you have to, I mean, marketing is going to make all the difference. Ultimately, the book has to be a good book. That's the only way it's going to endure. It might do wonderfully in the first couple of years, first 3 years. But in 10 years' time, if a book has still got shelf life and it's still being read and discussed and people are engaging with it, then there is something to it that makes the book stand apart. And it's not just marketing alone that's going to make the difference. And I don't believe that you have to be very, very aggressive. I mean, you know, every writer has a point of view on how they want to see their book in the marketplace. But I believe that it's possible to do so without having to turn in fact, every time, I've heard this before, it's not just young writers like either of you, but I've heard people use the word product. You can't call a book product. It bothers me, really.
Okay. Before we bring Ashwin into the conversation, I just have one point to make on this, and that is, the book needs to be fundamentally good to sell.
Ravi, actually, I don't want to come into the I'm enjoying myself. So please carry on.
Okay. Fundamentally, a book needs to be good for it to sell. Okay, that's a given. A bad product can be pushed by good marketing once. But after that, you will not be able to sell your name and sell your books again.
Absolutely.
The second time, but having said that, a lot of good products, and I say this with lot of thought and agony, a bit of agony. I'll tell you why it's agony. That a lot of good products today don't sell, don't make it to the market, even because the reader community doesn't even know about it. No. I have read tens of good books which have been written by brilliant authors like yourself, which have come out today, but not stocked in the market, not seen in the stores, nobody knows about them, media doesn't cover them, and they just disappear. Now, it's not about, you are a success, great. You had a certain approach, wonderful. But today, a lot of brilliant books or brilliant products fail because nobody even puts them out and promotes them well.
Actually, Ravi, as a counterfactual, may I offer the fact that two books that have remained constantly in print in India are by dead people, and they sell a lot every year. One is, of course, the books of Mahatma Gandhi. The other, bafflingly, is that chap, Herr Hitler, who wrote Mein Kampf, which you find on every Indian pavement. It's been a while since he did any marketing efforts.
No, Naresh, I'm sorry. Ashwin Sanghi's first book, Rosabelle Line, even still tops the Nielsen charts. My first book, If God Was a Banker, came 7 years back. It still sells a lot.
I'm not suggesting
probably
that
more than the names that you're selling. So promoting a book and making people aware of it does not for a minute mean that it kills the book's longevity. It probably promotes the book in the initial phase, gets more people to read it, but after that, it sustains. If it's a good product, it will sustain. People will still read it year after year after year.
Anita, do you have a final comment you want to offer on this before we move on? Or
Well,
should we move? Do we have to move on?
Well, just one point, I mean, very often outside India, I mean, every time there's a book fair, Frankfurt, London, whatever, and there is this whole thing of, is Indian writing the new wave, etc. They've been talking about it, and like, whenever I'm asked about that, I say that, if there is a wave, whatever it is, whether, in fact, you go to a bookshop now and they'll say, the new wave is mythology, or the new wave is history, or whatever. But the thing is, the reader is not a fool. The reader would read that writer one time, taken in by all the marketing effort, the hype, the media hype, everything. But the reader is not a stupid person, and they actually invest money into it. So why would they go back and read that writer again unless that...
If they don't like it, and if it's a bad product can be sold by good marketing once.
No, but why do you insist on calling a book a product? That is my problem with it.
A book is a product.
No, it is
a
not.
A product created out of your own sweat and blood and toil.
All right, let's settle this the democratic
I think
way.
it's more nomenclature.
How many of you think a book is a product? Put your hands up. Well, potentially your readers, lots of them don't think they're products. All right, let's move on.
Guys, go and read my book, not Anita Nair. The guys who picked up their hand. Okay. The others can go and read Anita's book. That's fine.
Both of you all have already touched on the role of the social media in keeping in touch with readers and getting their feedback, but also in marketing your book. And I wanted to know from you sort of how you use social media. I know it takes, if you're getting 100 messages a day, that's a lot of work. You're replying to all of them.
I think, first of all, just to take away from the discussion which I was out of, which I immensely enjoyed.
Thought we'd moved on.
There was a study done by Google about 2 years ago. And the purpose of the study was to find out how many books are there in this entire universe. And they found that the total count was about 129 million unique titles. What is very scary is the fact that about 10 million titles get added every year because of this entire self-publishing revolution that has been created. We have a large number of titles coming back into that universe. Now, what is the effect of that? We always have these great stories about self-publishing miracles which have happened, the Amanda Hawkings of the world. But the truth is that the average self-published title in our country, not only in our country, but globally, across the world, sells 57 units during its lifetime. One book will sell 57 copies, and I can bet you that the vast majority of that 57 is the author, the author's mom, the author's dad, and so on and so forth.
I have a lot of cousins, so that helps for me.
So this is the reality of the long tail is very, very, very long. The other implication of this is that in a completely unrelated study, someone tried to check as to what is the reader attention when they go into a bookstore. And they found that the average reader spends a little less than 7 seconds on the front cover of a book. Then he flips it over if the book cover interests him, and he will spend another 13 seconds in terms of perusing the back cover in order to just check whether the story appeals to him or not. In other words, you have 20 seconds within which to be able to either make up the mind of this customer whether he's going to carry this book to the cash register or not. So, to a very great extent, much as all of us, the way at least I like to think about it is, while you're writing, forget about the marketing. Just be true to your story, write from your heart, do what you think is right, and don't worry about whether it's going to sell 1 copy or 1 million copies. But once you've finished writing that book, I think it was Hemingway who said that, write when you're drunk and edit when you're sober. And I would say that probably the third stage is that market it with the passion of a drug addict, So probably, yeah. So once you're done with that point where you're done with the writing and you're done with the editing, then put on your businessman's cap and market it. Because you owe it to yourself and to your readers. What's the point of spending 2 or 2.5 years writing a great book if no one's going to read it? What's the point?
So what are the marketing strategies that have worked best for you? I've looked at your website and I've seen that you even have created animations. You have animations on your website that are rather racy, sex scenes and all.
I think the idea is basically, the first time when I went to a bookstore along with one of the representatives of my publisher, I had just written the Rosabal line, and I said, look, I don't want to go to cities and I don't want to just simply do events. I'd like to go to the bookstores. And my biggest concern was the fact that my book wasn't visible. So I still remember this particular gentleman telling me in Hindi, he said, "Jo dikhta hai, wo bikta hai." For those who don't understand the concept, it is basically visibility is all. And that's the time when I still remember a couple of weeks later, I was at Crossword in Kemp's Corner, their flagship store. And my book wasn't visible. I saw it at the back shelf. And I admitted about 3 weeks ago to the management of Crossword that on that particular occasion, I walked to the back shelf, picked up the 5 books that were there on the back shelf and brought them right to the front. And honestly speaking, I felt proud of myself for having done that. So, to my mind, I think it's a lot to do with making your book available. The biggest issue in our country is distribution and availability. You can do all the social media that you want. You can do all the marketing and events and hype and PR and all of that. But if after that, if someone walks into the store and your book isn't available, what's it worth? And that is one of the reasons why traditional publishing still has a very, very strong role to play in this country. You can't do away with that model of the traditional publisher because they are the ones who control distribution. So according to me, that is the biggest element of the jigsaw puzzle. The second part of it is the stuff that you do in order to connect with your readers. So for example, I mean, you mentioned that I end up getting a lot of communication from readers. I reply to every one of them. I may reply late. I may reply 3 days later or 5 days later, but I do reply. And similarly, for example, putting out free chapters of my book. That's a very common thing. I always put out a few chapters of my book once it's released. The idea being that if you were buying a car, you would want to test drive it, right? So if you're buying a novel, why is it different? Wouldn't you want to kick the tires? So I think that is the second
Sometimes kick the author.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's a combination of all of that. But yes, the one area where I do agree with what Anita said is that I wouldn't want to involve the readers in my process of creation. The creativity process is a sacred process, and that I like to keep to myself.
Ravi, what are your marketing secrets?
See, the entire concept of book marketing, which has worked for me, is the fact that, okay, let me just dwell into a little bit of what used to happen earlier. Earlier, a book used to come out, go to the stores, used to send 20, 30 copies of the book to reviewers who used to be extremely critical and harsh reviewers. And basis the reviews, people would then read those reviews and then make up their mind whether they should buy the book or not. That's what used to happen. The entire concept of book sales, okay, has moved from a review culture to a preview culture, which is before the book gets launched, give customers or give readers a certain taste of what the book is in, what a book is about. Could be in terms of free chapters, could be in terms of social media promotions, could be in terms of putting out a video trailer of the book and promoting the book, or could be in terms of you going and talking about the book at various stores, or putting up pre-booking orders on I've seen Ashwin push pre-booking 3 months before the book comes out. Okay. And
since you mentioned it, the last launch, my publisher is sitting here, but I think my hand was ready to fall off because I had signed more than 6,500 copies on that first day. So yeah, I see where you're going.
It's what it does to you, and this is with due respect to all the literary authors, Anita and the others in the audience, is when it creates a certain buzz about your book in the beginning, the book takes off. Okay, which means the first week it will become a bestseller. It will get into Nielsen. People will talk about it. There will be a lot of offtake of the book from the stores. It also kind of galvanizes the store. It kind of energizes the store. So the store people talk about it. When somebody comes and says, "What book should I buy?" the store recommends your book. So people actually pick it up and take it. See, end of the day, there are 1 million readers in this country. 100,000 might read Ashwin's or my books. There are still 900,000, okay, who don't pick up our books just like that. They have to be goaded. They have to be told to pick up the book or probably sold to. Okay. So I try to reach out to those people through various techniques so that I can actually sell my concept to them and sell the book to them. And then if they're interested, they'll pick it up. And all your marketing efforts have to come together, which means that your cover, your blurb have to be interesting. Your marketing campaign has to be interesting. Your books have to reach the stores on time, which is what you talked about, distribution. and the customers have to see the same promotion across. And that's when they connect. Oh, I saw this on Facebook. This is the book. Let me pick it up and read it. And then they pick it up and see it. They like it. They buy it. So everything has to come together. One cannot work without the other. Unfortunately, Naresh, today nobody knows in terms of which is that single element which is working and which is that element which is not working. So most of us actually end up doing multiple things just to make sure that we cover up even in case one fails and the other does not.
Anita, it occurs to me that sort of some of the disagreement is because you're actually writing for perhaps two different worlds, that their reader is not your reader, and your reader is still best informed and served by the world of reviews, for instance, by the things that a publisher has traditionally done. Do you actually, your approach would seem to suggest that you're actually very satisfied with the way your publishers promote your books. And how important do you think reviews are?
Well, I don't think reviews are all that important, because I think, unfortunately, especially in India, reviewers tend to, it's a very small, incestuous world. So at some point, if I have trashed somebody's book and my book comes out, that person's going to trash me back. Right? So that way and I think readers by now are cued in about that, and they understand, they can read between the lines. Initially, when I used to get a bad review, I used to be completely devastated. Not anymore, because you realize that I've seen readers who've turned up to me and said that, oh yes, we understand why that review is done. So I wouldn't say that I'm completely satisfied. I'm my publisher sitting here, but completely satisfied with what publishers do in terms of traditional promotional efforts. But I do see that all of them are making great efforts to try and push books, especially literary fiction titles, because it's not easy. It demands a lot from the reader. The reader has to match the writer's effort by understanding and following the pathway the writer has taken. It's not an easy read. And a writer makes it difficult for themselves by writing a difficult book. So to that extent, I don't think marketing alone is going to make a great difference. It's going to need a very engaged reader. It's going to need a reader who's interested in actually making that effort. So I think, I completely agree with you that the reader who reads me is very different from the reader who reads either Ashwin or Ravi, probably because that's what that reader wants. It's not saying that this reader is better than that, or the other way around. It's simply saying that there is room for everybody, and each to their own.
If I may interrupt for a minute, I found this interesting that, since we were talking about reviewers and reviews, well, frankly speaking, asking an author what they think about a reviewer, that's the relationship between the lamppost and the dog. Ask the lamppost how he feels when a dog pees every day on it, But the truth is that reviews, negative reviews, can actually be great marketing tools. Negative reviews. My publisher is sitting here, Gautam Padmanabhan, and he will recall that when I wrote my first book, The Rosabal Line, my reviews were glowing. And we struggled, because I was a relatively unknown author at that point of time. We struggled with the numbers. We did respectable numbers, but nothing which was incredible. And my second novel came out, Chanakya's Chant. And the very same, I'm not going to mention the newspaper, but the very same newspaper which had given me a glowing review for my first book said that Ashwin Sanghi has the intellectual caliber of Winnie the Pooh. And I remember calling up Gautam that day and saying that, this has happened, and he started laughing. And I thought that Gautam was, on their side, as it were. And surprisingly enough, 3 weeks later, we recorded some of the highest sales in the city where that review had happened. So to my mind, honestly speaking, I think far be it from no correlation, but I think there is an inverse correlation between reviews and sales.
I have a small point to make. In fact, I think it's very funny that, ultimately the reviews happen in everything. and then you do the next reprint of the book. That's when you put in all the, you know, those little things saying Hindu, Indian Express, Times of India, whatever. And between editors and writers, we have this great knack of pulling out exactly just the right phrase. So, so you could have like a review of 1,000 words where 970 words, you know, damned the book, decimated it. But we'll just pull out exactly 2 sentences. That's probably the reviewer being kind. And then we just put that in as a blurb. And then the rest of the world who come in at this point and start, you know, picking the book up wherever, and they see that, they think, wow, what a wonderful book.
No, I just have a question here. And that's the marketing that you do. So why are you rubbishing the marketing?
Not me. I said that's the thing that writers and editors everywhere do. I wasn't being specific about myself, Ravi.
Okay. And
listen.
Okay. And I have one more point. Naresh, just to add,
I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a ball out here. I'm having a ball.
Okay, Naresh, on your point of whether we write for different audiences and or not, I personally feel that guys who write literary fiction and the guys who call commercial fiction, the names given by people like the media and the readers, they're two different people. It's not about even the audience. Even the authors are completely different kind of people. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. You were there at the Crossword Book Award ceremony, okay? There were some 8-9 people who got awards, okay, that night. About 8 of them got awards for literary fiction, 1 got for popular fiction. All the 8 who got awards for literary fiction made thank you speeches. All the thank you speeches went like this. Thank you very much. I thank Crossword. I thank my publisher. I thank all of you here for having come here, and everything else. Not one, I was noticing, okay, not one single person, I'm not generalizing here, not one single person thanked the reader. Not one, okay, whereas the popular guy only thanked the reader. Okay. Now I went back and mentioned this to a publisher, saying that, why do you think this happened? And she rationalized. She said, that's because when a literary fiction writer writes a book, it's a journey for him or her. And he feels that the reader should be thankful that the author let him to be a part of his or her journey. Okay. Whereas the popular fiction guy was thankful to the reader that he actually picked up his book and read the book. And I think that is the fundamental disconnect between the two segments.
But also it's because the Crossword Award, to be specific about this, the other 7 are chosen by a jury. This one is voted for by the readers. And so there's a difference in the way they chose. But we need to move on now. If you have a question about dogs, lampposts, put your hand up. That lady there.
Hey Naresh, congratulations for...
Hello.
It's here, John is the name. Wanted to congratulate you to provoke all 3 of them pretty well.
They took no provocation, they did it themselves.
Yes, they were self-provoked. I was trying to reflect on what 3 authors were saying, and what came through to me was that 2 of them were trying to be a managerial problem-solving way of creating a product, and Anita was saying that, hey, I create for my own pleasure. Now, I was looking at, there is quite a lot of debate right now going in terms of whether you could, by design, be creative. And the point of conflict there between Ravi and Anita was, hey, design doesn't matter.
So could I ask you to get to your question?
No, I wanted to make a comment.
No, then we'll...
So the question is, does literary creativity be followed a design pattern? Question for Anita.
Well, for me, I couldn't. You know, I have to be very specific here because different people have different working styles. I couldn't. For me, it's an entire organic process where I have to feel compelled to, write about a particular issue or a particular character, and then the journey begins for me from there. So I couldn't actually, in fact, even when I'm writing a book, I have absolutely little control over which direction my book is going to go, because the characters are so dynamic that after a while, they lead the book forward. So there is no design at all that I could work within.
Thanks. Yeah. So we're only taking questions now, we're not taking comments, so please keep that in mind. Madam, you.
On? Can you hear me?
Yes.
You said the book is a product. When it comes out in the market, do you make the book as a brand or the author as a brand? So whatever the author writes, the next book also, because of the brand name you have created, the book sells. Is it so?
Should I take that?
Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
I think, in fact, that's a very intelligent question, actually. Because increasingly, if you see what's happening all around the world, authors have, to a certain extent, particularly in the world of commercial fiction, authors have become actually very successful franchises. Currently, for example, I'm writing a novel along with an American author, and he holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the maximum number of books sold anywhere in the world, which is 270 million. And he has brought it into an art form. He on an average releases, I think, about 5 or 6 books a year.
17 books in the last 2 years.
About 8 or 9. And in many instances, they are collaboration projects with authors like me. The point I'm making is that the reason why those books work is because his name is there. And so, to a very great extent, it is the author which has become the brand, which is making that book actually sell. It's what pretty much happens in Hollywood and Bollywood and the rest of it. I mean, today you had a Dhoom 1 and a Dhoom 2 which weren't as successful, and suddenly you get an Amir Khan and Dhoom 3 becomes brilliant. That is the franchise value of, So I think in the commercial world, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But I don't know whether that would necessarily apply to the world of literary fiction, because I think the rules are different.
Since the session was about how to make an impact, if you could just tell us, each one of you all, and in that narration includes you too, because you're an author too, what is the single most important thing to create an impact, according to each of you? Just one thing. Like
Naresh start.
Sure, you write the damn thing.
I don't think any of us can answer anything after that, so let's.
So then, there's no argument at all.
Excuse me, sir. Yeah. Excuse me, sir. It's a question for you, sir. I mean, Ravi, sir. Here.
He's there.
On your right, sir, on your right.
Okay,
it's a question for you, sir. Since you have mentioned the phrase literary authors, how can you differentiate a pulp fiction from a mainstream literature or a literary fiction? As a one-name writers, we should know that. And while I was reading Salman Rushdie, I could find some pulpy elements in his book. And at the same time, I was reading Durjai Datta. I could find some literariness. So what is actually, I mean, where this particular distinction lie?
Okay, this is a distinction not brought about by authors. This is a distinction which is brought about by and large, the publishing community, by the readers, who segregate authors as commercial authors and literary authors. So, very, very loosely put, you will call literary authors who get critical acclaim and commercial authors as ones who bring in the sales. That's a very loose way of defining. But having said that, I think if you don't have even bits of literary stuff in your book, if you don't write good English, if you don't write language which is readable and understandable by people, then commercial doesn't make sense at all. So there's a certain threshold which you need to cross to become a good author. Okay, period. After that comes commercial or literary, depending on
By the way, there was this old, I can't remember which Hollywood actress it was, who said that the difference between erotica and porn is only the lighting. So, I mean, at the end of the day, let's face it, I mean, it's in the eyes of the beholder. It's the person who's watching who says whether it's porn or whether it's erotica. And that's the same thing which applies even with books.
Hello? We'll take a last question from the lady in the front.
I just wanted to ask you, all of you, what is the purpose of this discussion? Because when it's so clear to everyone, Anita Nair, called a literary author, has got a different kind of this thing, and other two have got a different kind of a concept. So there are two parallel lines which won't meet at all at any time. So what is the purpose of this discussion?
Go for it.
No, I think you should be the one answering it. Because all three of us are invitees here. You are the one who's the moderator. So
and you're the only one who can answer what is the purpose of this discussion.
To attempt a metaphor, railway lines, there are two of them. They never meet, but they get you somewhere. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but they've said we have to finish here.
Sir, I have a question.